Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, the films that shaped the MTV generation. My original plan was to devote this episode to Rob Reiner's hilarious and influential 1984 tour mockumentary, This Is Spinal Tap. That is absolutely going to happen someday soon, but for many of us, 2020 was a terrible year. So I wanted to get 2021 off to a giddy and champagne-fueled start with a look at Duran Duran's tour documentary from 1984, Sing Blue Silver. Because while Spinal Tap is an outrageously clever parody of tour documentaries, Sing Blue Silver is the real thing, and it showcases Duran Duran at their most over-the-top, overindulged, chaotic, hilarious best. Directed by Michael Collins, who directed a handful of Toto videos, Sing Blue Silver chronicles the North American leg of Duran Duran's global Sing Blue Silver tour, which, as a scroll at the beginning informs us, shown over scenes of multiple large moving vans moving Duran Duran's stage sets and tour paraphernalia across the United States, started in January 1984 in Calgary and ended in April in San Diego for a total of 51 gigs in 43 cities. At this moment in history, Duran Duran were at the height of their power and popularity. In just the few short years since the release of their 1981 self-titled debut album, they'd become chart-topping new wave superstars, MTV royalty, and teen idols. I gave you a rundown of the boys several months ago when I looked at Duran Duran's Russell Mulcahy-directed sci-fi-themed concert film Arena: An Absurd Notion, but just as a refresher, Duran Duran circa 1984 was comprised of energetic frontman Simon Le Bon, phenomenally beautiful bass player John Taylor, rambunctious party boy guitarist Andy Taylor, stoic and introverted drummer Roger Taylor, and magical pixie Nick Rhodes, the band's coldly calculating mastermind who also plays keyboards. Sing Blue Silver kicks off with a press conference, at which the boys get a lot of mileage out of an innocent question about learning to play their instruments. The innuendo gets stronger and stronger as the question passes from Duran to Duran, because if there's one thing you should know about Duran Duran, it's that they'll never pass up an opportunity to crack a masturbation joke. Except for Roger, who is the only Duran to shun the spotlight. As the question reaches him, you can see the look of terror on his face as he realizes he's going to have to be raunchy and cheeky on the spur of the moment, which is simply not Roger's way. He freezes, and Andy jumps in with a splendidly naughty and clever response. This is why Duran Duran fans know to this day that Roger needs two hands for his. Tour production manager Spy Matthews, a very loud and angry Australian whom we will see at various points throughout this documentary, yells on the phone at an unknown party demanding they lay in a good supply of Stolichnaya vodka for the band. Whenever we see Spy Matthews, he'll be on the phone, absolutely irate at whoever happens to be on the other end of the line. The lot of a tour production manager is not a happy one. And we can see why. This tour is a massive undertaking with lots of moving parts. Expectations are high, and there's a lot of pressure on everyone, including the audience members. Outside the band's current venue, hundreds of screaming Duran Duran fans, many of whom are girls or very young women, desperately press up against the doors in an attempt to get inside. It's scary, and even though the venue security guards are doing their job, it seems like the potential for injury is very real. The fan reaction to Duran Duran in the early to mid-80s is reminiscent of Beatlemania in the early to mid-60s, where fans could become injured or ill from the overcrowding and hysteria that would inevitably occur whenever the Beatles appeared in public. While all this is going on outside the venue, the Durans themselves are backstage, engaging in such time-honored pre-show rituals as snorting helium to make themselves talk in wacky voices. Nick, who is a strange and magnificent creature, is so wrapped up in his arcade game that he refuses to take the stage with his bandmates, until one of the band's wranglers physically picks him up and carries him off, while Nick wails in dismay like a disgruntled kitten. The Durans eventually reach the stage and break into their #1 single from 1983, Is There Something I Should Know? The performance footage throughout Sing Blue Silver is universally excellent. This was a strong tour, with each member of the band at the top of his game. I'm going to draw your attention to how Nick, at his state-of-the-art Fairlight CMI synthesizer, is plunged into darkness at various parts of the song, because that will become pertinent later. In the audience, fans faint from the heat or the stress or the excitement and are carried out of the arena by the security guards. After the concert, various near-hysterical young fans are interviewed about their overwhelming love for Duran Duran. Everyone's really excited, except for these two girls in their matching chauffeur caps and Ray-Ban sunglasses, who speak in a world-weary manner about how Duran Duran are way too old. These two are the poster children for jaded and disaffected Gen Xers. If you ever want to know what I was like when I was young, look no further than these two. While the band members perform Planet Earth, the first single released from their self-titled 1981 debut album, we're treated to footage of Duran Duran in transit, being chauffeured in limos to their private jet as they crisscross the country on their non-stop tour. John Taylor gives an interview in his hotel room while half awake, rumpled in his pajamas with his hair in tangles, yet still looking like wars could be fought over his phenomenal bone structure. John, who seems glamorously exhausted, observes that it's the publicity onslaught while on tour that grinds him down, not the nightly performances. Is There Anyone Out There plays during an endless barrage of giving interviews and signing autographs and participating in photo ops. Simon and Nick are interviewed for NBC's Friday night videos, and man, there is just an awful lot of Vaseline slathered on that camera lens. They're both beautiful young men with flawless skin, so I have no idea why someone decided the focus needed to be that soft. Nick and Simon are both defensive and prickly at the suggestion that Duran Duran is a prefabricated band, assembled inorganically by managers who dictate their creative direction. And yeah, they're right to be defensive about that, because whatever your Duran opinion, Duran Duran was formed in 1978 by childhood friends John and Nick, who had a very specific vision for the band. Throughout the band's 40-year-plus history, creative decisions, for good or for ill, have been made primarily by the band members themselves and not their management. While the Wilder Than Wild Boys extended mix of the Wild Boys plays, the band members explore New York City. Nick wears a fabulous French Foreign Legion hat and swans around Fifth Avenue with his soon-to-be wife, American model and department store heiress Julianne Friedman, while Andy heads to Lower Manhattan to play billiards. Andy and Nick are the yin and yang of Duran Duran, diametrically opposing forces that somehow manage to complement each other. Andy is overheated and reckless, and Nick is cold and methodical. Their constant creative friction worked out very well for the band for several years, until it didn't. Andy is the only member of this original lineup who is not currently a member of Duran Duran. In New York, the band performs Union of the Snake on stage, and we can see that Nick is still plunged in darkness. Backstage after the gig, Nick goes on a dramatic tirade about the terrible, horrible, vile stage lighting, clutching a lit cigarette and visibly bristling with outrage. I once wrote a piece about Sing Blue Silver where I described Nick as going full tilt Norma Desmond in this scene, and I don't like to recycle jokes, but I don't think I'm ever going to be able to improve upon that description. Outside the venue, someone attached to the band is approached by three young female fans who are trying to get backstage, although they don't know a blasted thing about Duran Duran. Even though they fail every single one of his questions, including, "Can you name any single member of the band?" he gives them backstage passes, referring to them as the worst fans he's ever come across. In response, they tell him they want to meet Sting. Later, the Durans primp in the studio of legendary photographer Francesco Scavullo, getting ready for what would turn out to be one of Duran Duran's best and most famous photo shoots. While changing clothes, Simon frets about getting undressed in front of cameras because, in his experience, when he takes off his pants in front of members of the press, they accuse him of having chubby legs and a gut. The simple solution to this would seem to be to leave your pants on in front of members of the press, but in any case, this is in reference to the February 2nd, 1984 issue of Rolling Stone, which had a cover story on the band by journalist James Hankey, who does indeed make the unkind observation that Simon has chubby legs and a gut. If you read a lot of articles on Duran Duran, you become aware of a certain subcategory of music journalism, which this Rolling Stone piece falls into, where the journalist is so scornful of Duran Duran and their fan base that not only do they need to make the point that girls only like Duran Duran because the band members are good looking, but also that the band members aren't really that good looking. Hence, you end up with Rolling Stone making sure we all know that Simon has chubby legs and a gut. I have a great many thoughts on this subject, but in brief, historically, music journalists have often been quick to be snotty and dismissive about artists who appeal in particular to girls and young women, because things of importance to girls and young women are often dismissed as frivolous. This Rolling Stone piece, for instance, claims that, unlike guys, girls aren't into social issues or politics, but instead are into finding dream dates. I've loved Duran Duran since the early 80s for many reasons, because they write infectious songs, because their videos are wildly creative and stylish, because at heart they're a bunch of art school weirdos, because they're a little bit sleazy, because they play around with sci-fi and surreal themes, because they embody the over-the-top glamour and excesses that made the 80s so memorable. And yeah, the fact that they have super pretty faces is certainly up there on my list, but let's not throw out all those other reasons because you think girls and women only make decisions dictated by their hormones. While the chauffeur plays, the band's procession of limousines drives across ice-covered roads. The Durans conduct interviews with various media outlets at a bank of payphones at a frozen, snowy pit stop en route to Pittsburgh. Go ahead and add press junkets for pop stars to the ever-growing list of things the internet has made so much easier. In Atlanta, the band members attend a conference at the corporate offices of tour sponsor Coca-Cola. They are all clearly bored and exhausted, and one of the Coke executives gets the terrible idea to ask John Taylor on stage to say a few words. These days, that would be a sensible decision, because John Taylor circa 2021 is level-headed, diplomatic, and sober. John Taylor in 1984 was none of those things. Clutching a glass filled with something that's clearly not Coca-Cola, John takes the stage and promptly announces to a room filled with the top brass of the high-powered sponsor of his band's global tour that he prefers Pepsi. During a lively performance of New Religion, Nick is still plunged in darkness on stage. Backstage after the show, he hashes out the issue with the tour's lighting directors. Everybody's very polite and professional. Nick is nothing but friendly and sympathetic to their concerns, but it's a tense conversation. The lighting directors, who are being deferential but a bit condescending, try to convince Nick the issue is all in his pretty little head, suggesting it's an issue of vanity. Nick replies with a faint note of desperation that he couldn't actually see. In Washington, D.C., the Durans tour FBI headquarters in the Hoover Building. While 4 of the Durans are politely attentive, yet not all that interested in lectures on mobsters and state-of-the-art fingerprinting techniques, Andy has clearly found his new career path. He is super into it. You can see from his eyes that he is a heartbeat away from abandoning Duran Duran and embarking upon a new career path as a special agent. On the one hand, I think giving Duran Duran access to guns is a terrible idea, but on the other hand, this looks like the promo for a trashy 1980s action series that I would absolutely watch. Director Russell Mulcahy, who directed many of Duran Duran's most famous music videos and who would go on to direct the 1986 cult favorite Highlander, meets with the Durans to plan a concert film, which will be shot towards the end of this leg of the tour and which will become the bizarre sci-fi themed madness Arena, an Absurd Notion. Mulcahy asks the Durans if they have any ideas. Nick promptly replies that he's got loads of ideas. I may be imagining things, but it seems like Mulcahy trembles and goes a bit pale at that. He bravely tells Nick he'd love to hear them, whereupon Nick launches into his very detailed and precise ideas, which includes exact specifications for lighting and camera placement. Within the band and within Duran fandom, Nick has the nickname The Controller, and in moments like this, it's not hard to understand why. While sightseeing along Bourbon Street, Nick and Julianne get a lesson in tap dancing from a young street performer. Nick then has a chat with an elderly gentleman who regales him with tales about legendary jazz trumpeter Louis Armstrong, and about a local band who plays so well they can make a dead man walk out of his coffin. This is a scene that always stands out because it's one of the rare moments in Sing Blue Silver where we get to see one of the Durans interacting with someone who isn't involved with the band or the tour in any way, and who is either unaware of or unimpressed by their level of celebrity. On stage, Simon dedicates a performance of Save a Prayer to legendary singer-songwriter Marvin Gaye, who'd been shot and killed by his father the day before. During the performance, Simon poses attractively with an acoustic guitar while all the audience members hold their lighters aloft. This is probably the part where I should wax nostalgic about the days of waving lighters at concerts and mutter something about how kids these days just wave phones. But honestly, I haven't been to a concert in so long that I watch Sing Blue Silver just to remind myself what a concert is. As the Durans leave the venue, their limousines are surrounded by screaming fans. Inside one limo, John, Nick, and Julianne, who are all wedged into the back seat with at least one camera person in close proximity, have a casual conversation about how Nick has the flu. In these present days of mask wearing and social distancing, this scene plays out like the opening scene of a dystopian thriller. In another limo, Roger has a quiet and contained breakdown, probably from the screaming fans and the stress of touring and the constant documentary cameras. Roger seems close to tears, and in one of Sing Blue Silver's kindest and most generous moments, Andy distracts him and calms him down by comparing the various blisters on their fingers from playing their instruments. In the Oakland Coliseum, preparations are underway for the pair of concerts that will form the basis of Arena, an Absurd Notion. Before the concert begins, Simon shows up in a sling, claiming he dislocated his elbow, which will presumably cause all kinds of complications while filming. He then reveals it's all a merry prank, and while John and Andy are in hysterics, Roger gets a faraway expression on his face, some combination of bone-deep exhaustion and confusion over why Simon thought that was a good idea. Duran Duran plays The Reflex during a sound check, and Roger is now wearing the very distinctive shirt that Simon was wearing during the previous scene, a shirt which has appeared many times before in this documentary, in fact, because the boys have apparently reached the stage of touring where they're raiding each other's suitcases. Fun fact, apparently while on tour, Nick used to sneak into Simon's hotel room and rummage through his suitcase and throw away items of clothes he personally disliked. Simon has claimed in interviews that Nick views it as his job to choose Simon's socks and underwear, and I do not think he was joking. Duran Duran play the surefire crowd pleaser Hungry Like the Wolf, followed by Careless Memories. Backstage after the show, John, Simon, and Andy mashed together in a big, sweaty, shirtless, teary-eyed hug to celebrate the end of the tour. Nick is nowhere to be found, and Roger, who looks like an empty shell of a once youthful and vibrant drummer, stares at them blankly for a bit, then grabs a beer and flops down on a couch, staring out into the void. Sing Blue Silver captures Duran Duran on the cusp of an explosion. They will never be more famous or under as much pressure from that level of global fame than they are at the time depicted in the film. By the end of the year, in desperate need of a creative hiatus from the band, they temporarily split into two separate camps. John and Andy joined up with Robert Palmer and Chic's Tony Thompson to form the supergroup The Power Station, while Nick, Simon, and Roger became Arcadia. They reunited as Duran Duran in 1985 to perform at Live Aid and to record the hit title track to the Bond film A View to a Kill. But by the end of the year, Roger had quit the band to lead a quiet life in the English countryside, while Andy made a more acrimonious exit shortly thereafter. Duran Duran continued on with various lineup adjustments until the original five reunited in 2001. Andy, ever the loose cannon, left for the second and presumably final time in 2006, but Simon, John, Nick, and Roger are still together, touring and releasing new music, and by all indications, thoroughly enjoying it. Back in the 80s, Duran Duran showed young Gen Xers how to be glamorous and wildly decadent, complete with great clothes and champagne and cocaine and videos with boobs in them, and Nick hanging out with Andy Warhol, and Simon almost drowning in a terrible accident while racing yachts. Duran Duran were the quintessential teen idols for Gen X because they didn't just make music. They skillfully developed and exploited the visual side of their image through their elaborate, artistic, and stylish videos on MTV, and through Sing Blue Silver, which showed us all that the boys of Duran Duran were messy and loud and weird and chaotic and really, really entertaining. Next time, I'm going to dive into the directorial debut of the father of 1980s teen cinema with John Hughes' 16 Candles. Best wishes to all of you for a happy and healthy 2021, and I'll see you here later.